All right.
Okay. Well, hello. Do you want to introduce like a little bit, or you just want me to start talking?
Oh, well, you know, we're going to talk about oceanography today. Cynthia Cudaback is our presenter. She's going to give you her background. Let us know, Cynthia, if you want, if you don't mind questions in between or after. Do you want to save them?
Well, my presentation is kind of in two sections.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we have a question opportunity when I finish kelp forest and before I start on wolves?
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now she's going to introduce what she's going to present about and get started here. Thanks, Cynthia. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. We know it's busy because we have to schedule these things months in advance because of you guys and your busy schedules. So we really appreciate her coming here to speak with you guys today. And we appreciate the rest of you guys spending a Friday afternoon, evening with us as well, because you could be doing other things on a Friday. So thank you, and here we go.
All right. Let me go ahead and spotlight myself. Okay, there we go. Hi guys, I'm Cynthia Cudaback. I like to go by Dr. C because I do have a PhD in oceanography. So the C is for Cudaback and the C is for what I study. Brief sort of bio. I am in Oakland, California. I'm currently sitting about a block from the house I was born in. So this is really my home territory. I grew up in Oakland, went to UC Berkeley for undergraduate, picked up a degree in physics. I then joined the NOAA Corps of Commissioned Officers, which is a commissioned federal service, officers who operate research vessels for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I started doing some ocean science while I was there. This took me eventually to a PhD at the University of Washington, which is also where I met my husband and became a storyteller. So it was a really important, formative time in my life. And in fact, today's presentation, I think I'm going to give it to you more story-like than scientific presentation-like. Let's see, PhD, bounced around academia a bit. I had about a 25-year research career, including the time spent in my degree. But what I realized was that I love doing science, I really do, but teaching science is even more rewarding. So I'm actually now a high school physics and environmental science teacher, and but I still put myself on Skype as scientist because I have all this research background. So today, what we're going to talk about is ecosystems. Although my background is in physics, the story about ecosystems is just really a very interesting story. And see what we've got here. Let me see. I don't want to share it. I want to, there we go, share screen. And this one, share. Okay, you should now be looking at my slideshow. All right.
Yep.
So my story starts on the California coast, where the wind out of the north draws cold wind up from under the water, from under the ocean. The wind draws the water up and the water carries nutrients. So we have a very, very productive ecosystem. What you're looking at right here is a kelp forest. This is these beautiful, tall, technically they're not plants, they're algae. Technically they're a whole different kind of thing, but they sure look like plants to me. And they're waving back and forth under the ocean. A kelp forest is a stunningly beautiful place. And as you can see, we have the light streaming down from above. There's some good physics here, optical manhole. And it's not just pretty algae, it's a tremendously productive and rich ecosystem. These are some of the beasties that live in the kelp forest. Over on the left, we have, well, I'll go to him last. We've got a harbor seal, This may be a sunfish. We've got some sardines. California had a very productive sardine fishery for decades that started with this kelp forest. We have a sea lion back here, something that may be a cormorant up there. A bunch of, these are pelicans. Back there, there's a whale. We have what appear to be some harbor seals on the beach back there, some more sea lions up here. We've got fish. We've got all sorts of interesting colored algae. We've got some barnacles. We just have a really productive and thriving ecosystem. Now, a lot of people think that the coral reef is the coolest and most beautiful ecosystem in the world. I'm
You know what's even better, teacher?
I beg your
You know
pardon?
what's even better? Building a reef.
Building a reef is excellent. Could you do me a favor and save your questions for about midway through?
Yeah,
Thank you.
building a reef is much more better than seeing one.
Oh, it's even better than seeing one is building one. I agree. But my personal favorite ecosystem is the kelp forest. Now, the one fellow I haven't mentioned here, these two guys turn out to be really important players in the kelp forest. And let's take a look at them. Now, the bottom of the kelp is not a plant, it's a kelp frond, a kelp organism. It doesn't have roots. That's part of the way you know it's not a plant. It has what's called holdfast, which are literally hold fast to the rock. And as the kelp is swaying back and forth in the water, those holdfasts are essential for its survival. But here you have a screen all covered with these little spike balls. Those are sea urchins. Sea urchins crawl along the ocean floor, and one of their favorite foods is kelp holdfast. So imagine this kelp, and it's attached to this rock, and it's holding on, and here comes the sea urchins. Nibble, 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 nibble. And next thing you know, the kelp is floating away. Sea urchins can completely destroy kelp forests, leaving nothing beyond, nothing behind but what we call an urchin barren. All of that productivity, all those green fronds and all those animals, all gone, just sea urchins on the ground. And that
So
is
what we do?
Please save
So
your
what we do?
questions for later.
Okay.
We'll get to that point, I promise. Urchins, urchin barrens, dead zone. But there is one animal in the kelp forest that is the superhero of the kelp forest, and this is he. This is the sea otter, diving down out of the light very dramatically. Lots of bubbles streaming off his fur. And what the sea otter does is he dives down and he grabs a sea urchin. And he grabs himself a nice rock. And he goes up and he lies on top of the water. They're very, very buoyant. Puts the rock on his chest and he takes that sea urchin and he goes, whack a snack, whack a snack. Now, if we were in person, I would get you all pretending to whack a snack. Perhaps some of you will indulge me in whack a snack, whack a snack. And that is the sea urchin breaking the sea otter breaking the thorns off of the sea urchin in order to get the tender meat inside. When the sea otter eats the sea urchin is no longer able to destroy the kelp forest. And there's quite an astounding story in the Monterey Bay area that starts with sea otters, and here's our sea otter eating his sea urchin snack. As you can see, he has 2 urchins on his tummy. You can't see the rock, but you can tell he's about to dig into this spiny and delicious treat, which will, as I said, protect the kelp forest. Without the sea otter, there is no kelp forest. Well, here's the problem. The sea otter has this incredibly rich, thick, soft fur, something like 1 million hairs per square inch, incredibly wonderful, warm, thick fur. And they're big, a sea otter. A sea otter from head to tail is almost 6 feet long. And what that means is that they are very, very attractive to Russian fur traders. In Russia, in winter, it gets very cold. They need furs to wear. And so the Russian fur traders worked their way down the coast of Western United States, starting in Alaska. And there's still a lot of Russian churches in Alaska. And then they worked down into California. If you've ever been to Fort Ross, which is up halfway to Mendocino, that is an old Russian fort. And the fur traders came and they started killing the sea otters in order to make fur coats out of them. And this went on for, gosh, 100, 200 years, something like that. I'm not sure exactly how long, until, let me see if I got this right one here. Whoop. Hello. Sorry, slideshow's not advancing. There we go. So there are some sea otter pelts on the right being turned into very pretty, very warm and comfortable sea otter coats. As I said, this went on for a few hundred years, resulting in a sea urchin barren. The kelp forest is completely gone, and there's just sea urchins and nothing else. So this is not a good situation. Now, the role that the sea otter plays is a very special name. It's called a keystone predator. If you're building an arch out of rocks, there's my rocks coming up and coming in, there's this one stone right at the top of the arch that holds the whole thing together. And that stone is called the keystone. If you take out the keystone at the top of the arch, the whole thing collapses. And that's the same with the sea otters. The sea otter is a keystone predator. If you take the sea otter out of the ecosystem, the entire ecosystem collapses. So, hang on, there we go. And there's our little sea otter waving goodbye. But here's where the story gets better. Now, Cannery Row was written by John Steinbeck. He was set in Monterey where the sardine canneries were. And this was, I guess in the 30s of this, yeah, probably long around the 30s during the Depression. And up until that point, for a few hundred years, there had been thriving fishery on the California coast. They would fish for mackerel, for sardines for a while, and then mackerel for a while, back and forth. But both of these animals depended on the kelp forest. And at the time that Cannery Row was being written, the kelp forest and the fishery it supported were both collapsing in California. And the whole area died. Biologically, ecologically, and economically, it became a complete wasteland until sometime late in the 20th century, a few sea otters came in from somewhere and they started eating sea urchins. And then they had baby sea otters and they ate a few more sea urchins, and they single-pointedly restored the thriving kelp forest in Monterey Bay. And here we have what the kelp forest looks like, again, after the sea otters have returned. They've eaten, not all of the sea urchins, there's still urchins there, but they're kept in balance. They're kept in check by this keystone predator. And here we are again with a beautiful, thriving ecosystem in Monterey Bay. If you live in California or Nevada even, I don't care, you really should visit the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is a beautiful, it's looming institution right on the shores of Monterey Bay, celebrating the Monterey Bay kelp forest, which was restored by the keystone predators, the sea otters. Now, this is the break point. Lucian, you've been very, very anxious to talk about something. This would be the time to do so.
You know what? Those Russian people should be in jail for doing that to the sea otters because that's illegal.
It is now, but it wasn't 200 years ago.
I don't care about what they do to their church to just make a sweater. Why can't they just use things like the smart way, like they don't need to hunt for the sweater, they just got to use it out of
that is
thread and needle.
A very modern view. Back in 17 something and 18 something, people didn't know that people didn't, it's taken humans a long time to realize just how much hurt we can put on the environment. And
yes,
back in
I have an
17 something
idea.
and 18 something, they had no
We
idea.
can time travel. We can time travel back to that time and take them.
I'm sorry, I had to put him in the waiting room. So,
Okay,
go ahead.
little bit overexcited there.
Yeah,
All righty, no problem.
go ahead.
So what you see on your left is the kelp fronds waving. And on the right, another thing of a similar shape, but seems completely unrelated. That is the Old Faithful Geyser in Yellowstone. What on earth do kelp forests have to do with Yellowstone? Well, it turns out the same story played out in both places. Hang on, let me just do this. All right, so here is the Yellowstone River. And what you see is a beautiful valley and a nice slow moving river and bison grazing. Yellowstone was America's first national park and first natural reserve. I always get a little confused about exactly, Yellowstone and Yosemite were like playing tag. One of them was the first reserve and the other was the first park. Either way, Yellowstone is one of the first places in America that was reserved for the protection of wildlife and natural beauty. And it is a wild and beautiful place. I was there this last summer, fabulous. Now in Yellowstone, we have a lot of rather nifty beasties. What you're looking at here is what scientists called charismatic megafauna. Charismatic megafauna are big, gorgeous animals that everybody looks at them and says, wow, that's a gorgeous animal. And because that animal is so gorgeous, I'm going to work to protect it. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of things that grow in Yellowstone that are much smaller and aren't as cute as these guys. But these guys are the ones that people notice. We have on our left, and I do apologize for the icky watermark on here. This is simply the best picture I could find of the Yellowstone ecosystem. So we have ourselves an eagle, an elk, a bison. Down here we have a grizzly bear, bighorn sheep, more eagles. I just realized the bald eagle is labeled golden and the golden is labeled bald. We can tell the difference. That's a bald eagle. We got ourselves a moose, we've got ourselves a wolf. We have a very rich and thriving ecosystem. Now, but there's a problem, again, with human interests, selfish human interests colliding with natural world. In this case, the issue is not fur coats, but rather land use. A lot of people who want to ranch cattle right around Yellowstone, not actually in the park, but next to it. And if you look at this, you can probably guess which animal the cattle rancher least wants to see. Oh, it's this one. Cattle ranchers see wolves as the enemy, see wolves as four-legged cow eaters, basically. So there was a bounty on wolves. People would get money for shooting wolves, and that went on for, again, 100 or 200 years. But let's take a look at the effect of the wolf on the ecosystem. Here he is. This is sort of our historical view of wolves, right? Yeah, we grew up on the big bad wolf, and here is this wolf with this intense gaze. He's hunting, he's scaring, he's not drooling or anything, but he looks reasonably scary. That was the scariest looking wolf I could find among real photos. And for centuries, people thought that this was the best way to deal with wolves. Kill them, because then the wolves can't mess with our cows and our sheep and our pigs and our people and Little Red Riding Hood and all that, you know. Little Red Riding Hood and the three little pigs, the way they dealt with wolves was to kill them. Wolves were scary. But here's what happens in Yosemite. Now, remember in the kelp forest, we had the sea otter eating the urchin, which kept the urchin from destroying the kelp. And here is a similar process. Here is a wolf hunting for deer and keeping the deer population under control, which allows the trees to thrive. Deer love to eat little baby trees. They're young and tender. Here is the wolf removed from the kelp forest. And instead of one deer, suddenly there are 5. And look what they've done. They've eaten all the grass. They've eaten all the branches on those lower trees. that ecosystem is beginning to look like an urchin barren, except it's, I don't know, a deer barren or something, right? And that's the way it was in Yellowstone for a long time. Until about, so I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, I want to say it was maybe 30 years ago that scientists realized that wolves were an important part of the ecosystem, started reintroducing the wolves to Yellowstone. And here's what happened. In 2002, now you can tell, first off, these two pictures are taken the same place. You have these two hills, right? And see, there's that little cabin that's in both pictures. So in 2002, you're looking at a pretty barren landscape. A lot of trees that have been chewed up, not a lot of plants in this stream area here. And that's around the time the wolves were reintroduced. And what happened is when the wolves came back, they started not necessarily eating the deer, but just scaring them. So the deer would move away and go somewhere else. And the result is, see how these trees had nothing on them? Well, those trees are gone now. But we've got some trees back here that are getting nice and healthy. We have lots of nice shrubs. Shrubs are great. They're good. They provide habitat for mice and songbirds and all sorts of cool stuff like that. And so they returned the wolves, allowed the ecosystem to start restoring itself. It's called a trophic cascade. So our two vocabulary words for today. The first is keystone predator. That is a predator that keeps the system in balance. The trophic cascade is a description of the process by which the predator maintains that balance. Trophic refers to levels of the food chain, and a high-level predator, such as here our wolf, affects the populations of different animals. So that's a cascade through the trophic levels. So when you have, whoops, I am so sorry. When you have wolves, there we go. When you have wolves in your ecosystem, you're going to have your, so here's what happened when the wolves came back. It was amazing. First, the deer, they're on the right, moved away from the streams a little bit. That allowed room for little shrubs and little baby trees to grow. Next thing you know, we're seeing more mice and more songbirds. Those little shrubs and baby trees, they're also protecting the banks from erosion. So the streams start running cleaner and they start riffling more like this. And next thing you know, we've got beavers coming back. It's been an astonishing story of all the amazing things that came back. The one thing that there's fewer of in Yellowstone right now is the big elk. But because we've got the wolves back, we've got the bears, we've got the plants, we've got the songbirds, it's just been an amazing restoration. So the wolf plays exactly the same role as the sea otter. And that is the end of my presentation. So I'm ready to open up to questions, although I might relax a little, put my feet up while we talk. All right. So what do you guys think? Let's get some stuff going in the chat.
Yeah, now I opened the chat back up. I had to disable it for a minute, but
Yeah.
anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat.
So am I still screen sharing? Jacqueline said it looked like I didn't. Okay, so your
Yes.
keystone predator, that's either the otter or the wolf. It's the predator that maintains biodiversity by keeping under control the animals that eat all that can damage the ecosystem. So Francisco, I think you came in a titch late. Did you catch the whole sea otter story?
No, I don't think he did. He came in.
Okay,
late.
so the basic scenario is this: we have the sea otter eats the urchins, and then the urchins can't destroy the kelp forest. The sea otter is a keystone predator. The wolf hunts the deer, and therefore the deer don't destroy the meadows and forests, and the wolf is a keystone predator.
So Cynthia, I have a question.
Huh?
I know we talked about the deer and the wolves, correct? So is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as an animal that has the highest carrying capacity as far as what role they play in other animals destroying trees and what?
Interesting question. Yeah. So hang on, I'm going to answer your question, but yes, Francisco, you've got it. Isabel, I'm going to come back around in just a moment. So the question was just raised is there sort of like the ultimate keystone predator or something like that? And as far as I know, there is not. There are a lot of keystone predators out there. Probably every ecosystem has one, but the only ones I know about are the sea otter and the wolf, and they have very similar similar roles. I don't think there's any one animal that has more effect than them. Yeah, okay. You've heard the story, Francisco. I will share my slides with your leader so that you can have a look at them again. Okay, so Isabel, I'm glad you like the stories. I enjoy telling stories. I actually tell in a professional capacity a version of the story of Little Red Riding Hood, in which she is an aging wolf hunter, thinking back on the effects she's had, and then telling the story of the wolves in Yellowstone. Okay, so a food web versus an ecosystem and a food chain. So let's see. The ecosystem is all the stuff that's there. You know, your plants, your animals, the whole shebang. That's all the living things, and the air and the water. Those are all the ecosystem. Now, a food chain and a food web are similar concepts. A food chain is a very simple idea. You know, plants grow, and small herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores, you know, and just goes straight up like a chain, right? A food web is, well, the foxes eat mice and songbirds. And when you draw a food web, you get lots and lots of elaborate interconnections. But food chains and food webs are both ways of modeling or represented the interactions in an ecosystem. Make sense, Isabel? That answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. I'm glad you like my stories. Would you guys enjoy hearing my little red story just for jollies?
Sure.
All right. Give me 5 seconds. I need to go get my Red Riding Hood cloak.
Oh, she's going in the
Yeah,
store.
this is what I do with props.
You guys can put more questions in the chat for her while she's gone. That was good, Francisco, for coming in late. You had a lot of nice questions. Yes, cosplay.
All right. So as a storyteller, I don't usually use props, but I took a class recently in, well, sort of, yeah. I took a class recently in telling stories with props and additions. And what's fun about being on Zoom is I can bring my props in from the side. So normally when I do this, I have my screen off and I've got a walking stick. So I'm giving you kind of a strange version of the story. You're not supposed to see me suiting up. Let's see if I can do it. Barkeep, red hook, please. I know. So obvious, but hey, I have to keep on brand. Yes, I'm that red. You can tell, huh? Yeah. Well, listen. It's kind of interesting now. People don't remember what it was like when I was a little girl. When I was a child, we didn't have all this electrical lighting in cities and streets. The world was a dark and scary, scary place. And wolves really could harm you quite a bit. They could kill you. And so small thing as an adventure to grandma's house really could be deadly. Now, You've heard the whole thing about grandma in the wolf and grandma out of the wolf. Come on, guys. There is not room to be swallowed alive. But I admit, the thing about filling the wolf's belly with stones, yeah, we did that. I gotta tell you, man, that was a rush. Knowing that I could stop that beast hurting my grandmother, oh, I was never going to deliver baked goods again. Well, I became a wolf hunter. In fact, I became the best wolf hunter of my generation. Oh. See, if you're gonna be a good hunter, you gotta think like a wolf. And oh, I learned where they lived. I learned where they had their babies. I learned where they hunted. Now, obviously, I didn't stay 12 years old forever, right? So I had this interesting encounter when I was a new mother. My son was at home, 5 months old, but I was out hunting, and I saw a wolf stood from the corner of my pen, end of wolf. Actually, it wasn't a gun because it was, Middle Ages. It was a bow and arrow, but when I went to make sure that the wolf was dead, because I had learned to think like a wolf, and making them suffer, that wasn't right. So I went to make sure she was dead, and I saw that her teats were swollen, that she was a nursing mother, and my own bosom ached in sympathy when I realized what I'd done. Well, the cubs could not be left to starve. That would be cruel. And my job as a wolf hunter was to eradicate them. So I tracked the mother's path back to the den and cleared it out almost entirely. It was hard because this one little guy just sort of came tumbling up to me and looked at me with such trust in his eyes. And I just couldn't do it. I took him home. I raised him. Cody, my first wolf cub. Cody became the first of many. So I was living this odd double life. I was still working toward the ultimate eradication of wolves in the wild because that's what needed to happen in order for humans to survive. But I was also raising my cubs. And so every now and again, I would find a litter, or I'd even had a litter or two at home. And there'd be one or two cubs that were a little friendlier and a little braver. And I would adopt them, kill the rest. Life and death, you got to be practical. Well, here's the interesting thing that happened. Was after a few generations, the wolf cubs that I adopted, they started changing their characteristics. The third or fourth generation of wolves, that long pointy nose and slavering jaw had sort of flattened and pulled back into their face, and their ears had pricked up. They looked more like cubs. Just by selecting for the wolves that trusted people, I had started breeding sweet, cuddly, friendly dogs. That's right, Cody. So that was a really interesting discovery. But as I said, still my job. Yes, I hunted the wolves around Yellowstone. But you know what? After 500 years of wolf hunting, I had begun to think like a wolf a little bit. And when the scientists had this interesting idea about restoring wolves to Yellowstone, I got to be on the committee. We did it. We brought the wolves back to Yellowstone, and oh, it was amazing. The wolves were hunting the deer, and the deer weren't always just dying. They were just moving away from the streams. The streams were the most convenient place for the deer to graze, and they just moved away a little, and that allowed the shrubs to grow. And in those little streamside shrubs, there were songbirds and mice, and those attracted the foxes. And next thing you know, these same shrubs they're controlling erosion, and the stream is running clean, and the beaver came back. And 30 years after we brought the wolves back to Yellowstone, the entire ecosystem is restored and healthy again. So I'm here to tell you, after hundreds of years of changing relationships with wolves, we can change. We can do better. And this is the part where I've usually got a beer and I'm like that.
That's a great story.
Thank you.
That was neat.
Yeah, normally I have a pewter mug,
Mhm.
and so I can sort of toast the thing and that marks the end of it, but you get the idea.
Wow, yes. Yeah, I liked your code.
Yeah, it was really fun story to put together because I was taking this class and we were using props of various sorts. And he said, well, why don't you try taking, he recommended a new take on an old story. And this, bam, just sort of fell into my head like that. Because there are a lot of versions, including Into the Woods, in which Red becomes a wolf hunter. And so moving that forward and adding in the science was really easy to do. And this part, this was actually something that was especially noticed in Russia with foxes, was people were breeding foxes in captivity to use them for fur. So, you know, this weird relationship we had with animals. And what they learned was that the friendlier foxes, the ones that got along with people better, did have this what's called neoteny. The offspring of the friendlier foxes would have these flatter faces and more puppy-like appearances. So good science can be taught by stories.
Yes, yes, and you can get attention, that they're attention grabbers too. So I like it. Anybody have any more questions for Cynthia? Sophia.
Yeah, Sophia.
Yeah, so in science, I'm currently learning about something similar to this, but instead of the problem with animals more at the top of the food chain, then it started with plants. So is it the same thing? Like if one plant, what's it called? Or like takes over or dominates the other plants, then like will it like disrupt the balance?
Yes. So there's a couple of issues. Excuse me, I'm going to rotate because I'm sitting in a funny chair. Here we go. So there's a couple issues with plants. One issue is that humans really like to use plants for our own thing, like cutting down redwood forests to turn them into, on my honor, paper diapers. This was happening about 20 years ago. Redwood forests, old growth cedar forests in Alaska were being turned into paper diapers. So if you take away all the plants in an ecosystem, there's no ecosystem left. The other thing that happens is invasive species. So everything in the kelp forest has co-evolved. They work together. And everything in the kelp forest naturally has something it eats and something that eats it. But if you bring in an invasive plant that has no animals that naturally eat it in that ecosystem, it can take over and go crazy. I was living in Newton, North Carolina, North Carolina, for about 10 years. And what happened there is there's two kinds of kudzu. Kudzu is a vine, and the native kudzu was well adapted to the ecosystem. But when we brought in Chinese kudzu to be used in landscaping, that stuff just grew. I mean, I'm literally talking 3 feet a day. The kudzu actually engulfs entire trees. And it's because it's a non-native and it's not properly adapted to that ecosystem. There's nothing to balance it. So it just goes nutso. So 2 ways that the plants can really mess up an ecosystem is by being wiped out or being brought in and taking over. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Cynthia, tell us how you got into this as a career.
Let's see. So I started with an undergraduate degree in physics, and physics is still my favorite science for my own personal interest, but ecology is just something that, you know, really grabs people's attention. So undergraduate degree in physics. And then I was at Berkeley and there was this recruitment fair, and, you know, all these people are coming in to hire physics graduates, you know, come make radars for military use. And, Lytton, Northrop, all the big, scary, military industrial complex names. And then right in the middle of that is NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they're hiring people to operate their research vessels, become NOAA Corps officers. So I went off and operated research vessels. And I learned a lot about oceanography in the process. And through a series of, yet another story I can tell you at great length, I ended up back in graduate school studying actually what happens when the Columbia River hits the ocean. So again, I'm doing physics. It's all about, two types of water and they're mixing and they're moving and what's going on. But what set me on the track that is why I'm being able to have this conversation is I started doing postdocs with groups that were studying coastal ecosystems in California, not kelp forest, actually the intertidal, the really shallow water. And they were interested in how the physical currents affect the ecosystems. And that gave me sort of an ingress into learning more about ecology. And then I did a couple of things. I had this research career in oceanography for a while, and then I became a marine, and then left academia and became a freelance marine educator. I was literally, teaching, having kindergartners whack a snack. In case you're wondering, I didn't invent that for high school students, but yeah, kindergartners like whacking a snack. And then thing is, no matter how many after-school programs you do, that's not full-time. So eventually I came back to teaching high school, and I'm now teaching a mixture of high school physics, which is fun, and the International Baccalaureate class in environmental systems and society. And so what you're seeing is the environmental side of it. I think physics is super cool, but what catches people's attention is, seals and bison. And here I am. And then along the way, I also became a professional storyteller, and I do that now and again.
That's great. So any of you future oceanographers in there in the chat?
Say again?
I was asking any of the kids if they were interested in that career, that what would be the type of classes a high school kid would take?
Good question. So for oceanography, it's a good idea to start with one science. The graduate start over. I did graduate work in oceanography. And when you do graduate work in oceanography, they recommend majoring in one of the basic sciences: physics, chemistry, biology, geology, and then learning the other branches of science as you move forward. Oceanography is a fully integrated science. The physics affects the chemistry affects biology, all that stuff. And so a lot depends on how much education you want to have. I would recommend, if you're interested in marine science, taking some introductory classes. Choose a scientific major in college. It might not actually be oceanography per se, but take some introductory marine science classes. And I had the most wonderful thing happen the other day. It was so beautiful. Back in 2008, when I was teaching undergraduates, a young woman came to me. She was in my marine science, my oceanography class, and she found a fellowship for students who wanted to learn more about marine science. And I helped her with her essay, and of course recommended her highly. And I didn't hear from her until 2 days ago. She went on to get fully funded for a master's and PhD in marine science. She is now working in the field, and she's now reviewing scholarship applications for the same scholarship she got. And that's what made her think of getting in touch with me. Oh, that's the kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna back up and just have a look here. Okay, Francisco asked whether the Cape Cod is cosplay. Sure, why not? Big Wolf, yes. Thank you, Isabel, for the story. Thank you, Jacqueline, for the comment. Okay. A low environmental impact and a big environmental impact. Yeah, that's an interesting question. The bottom line, of course, is that everything is interconnected, right? And you never know which thing is going to mess up the whole system. Often the only way you find out is you take the thing out of the system, like you murder all the sea otters and the kelp forest goes away and you go, oopsie, right? Or you murder all the wolves and the Yellowstone ecosystem collapses and then you go, oopsie. But certainly keystone predators are the ones that I would consider to have the largest environmental impact. There's two other types of animals that you ought to know about. There's your flagship species, and those are any animal that can act as an ambassador. Look at me, I'm cute, I'm furry, I'm scary, I'm charismatic in whatever way, and don't you want to save my habitat? So a flagship species can have a very significant animal impact in that way by raising awareness of the importance of its ecosystem. And then there's apex predators. And I have a different definition of apex predators from most people. Your apex predator is the top of the food chain. Now, let's look at the kelp forest. The kelp forest, you go your kelp, then you got your urchins, you got all those other lovely animals, and then you got the sea otter. But what's at the top? What's at the top of the kelp forest? The thing that has the most impact is us. We're the ones hunting the otters. We're the ones using the kelp to make skin lotions. We're the ones taking all the abalone to eat. The animal that has the biggest environmental impact on any system anywhere is always us. So I do this a lot, and some teachers won't go for it. Some teachers will say, oh, the apex predator in the ocean is the shark. Like, it's us. We're out there killing sharks. So, you know, if you were taking an ecosystem class, go ahead and ask your teacher, what do you think of the idea that humans are actually the apex predator in every ecosystem? They may or may not go for it. Maybe just my thing. Okay, so Francisco was asking about the wolves changing the way they look. Isn't that amazing? Basically, if I understand it rightly, it's something like this. A puppy, wolf, dog, human, babies have various behaviors that make them cute and adorable, so you want to take care of them, right? And so when you have an animal that wants you to take care of it, the puppy that's the friendliest in the batch, and you breed for friendliness, it does this. It changes its look. It looks, the neoteny again is the process of getting younger looking. And I guess the idea is sort of the whole species is becoming more puppy-like, more friendly, more eager to have you look after it, and cuter, so you're more tempted to look after it. Isn't that whack? I mean, nature just blows my mind sometimes. Okay, let's see. Germs at the top of the food chain. Ooh. Huh. So here's the problem with the whole food chain concept, is that it has a top and a bottom. When you think about the full food web in a process, in a forest, for example, we tend to start with the zero order thing. We say plants, herbivores, predators, boom, right? But we totally forget every time something dies, you're dealing with detritivores. There's bacteria and fungi and things like that that have to break everything down. The food chain is a very limited concept. To describe it as a food cycle or a food, it is more accurate, because we go, you know, they live, they die, and then they get consumed by the detritivores, which could be germs. And then the food web is also a more important idea. So the thing about germs, Daniel, is you could be talking about, say, bacteria, which are definitely part of the food cycle because they are detritivores, or you could be talking about viruses, and viruses just have this totally different interaction with the world that kind of falls outside of the whole food chain model. Daniel, were you thinking about bacteria or viruses or what?
Maybe both.
Little both, okay. So a virus's purpose in life is to borrow genetic material so it can make more viruses. What the virus needs us to do is cough and sneeze and spread it around. It doesn't really necessarily benefit from killing us. That's just a side effect, collateral damage, literally. So I wouldn't, so virus really is out of the food chain in that way. I was thinking recently about the bubonic plague and that maybe the bacteria did have something to benefit from getting us to be dead and lie still so that like fleas could come and suck our blood and bite someone else. But I think really the answer is when you're starting to talk about germs, the whole concept of a food chain is no longer meaningful. I think that's really the key thing. They're part of they might be part of a food cycle, might be just a whole separate concept.
Okay.
These are excellent questions, guys.
Yeah, it really is.
You see any more in the chat? Because
No, Daniel's the last thing I see.
okay. Anybody else? All right, we're coming towards the bottom half of the hour anyway.
All right.
Gosh, Cynthia, I cannot tell you how amazing those stories were. And we were so glad this is her first time with us and won't be the last, we hope, right?
Good.
And, we plan on, let me stop this recording.